Good morning, everyone, and welcome to an exciting day in which we will be presenting two nice projects within the Interreg Northwest Europe framework. Two projects which are, well, towards their end on operational level, ALG-AD and ReNu2Farm. So my name is Erik Meers. I'm from the Ghent University in Belgium, and I have the privilege and honor to introduce today and moderate and guide you through the entire program of today. So maybe the next slide, please. Well, one of the things that I wanted to highlight behind the screens, we have the BioRefine Cluster Europe. It was not so in front in the invitations and so on. But for those not familiar with the BioRefine Cluster Europe, it's actually a nice story because it was also founded once under the previous program of Interreg Northwest Europe, spinning off of a project at that time, BioRefine, and it was intending to bring projects together in their communication output. The BioRefine cluster can be found, for those not familiar, on the biorefine.eu. And we also have joint undertakings such as communication means. We have the monthly bulletin in which we present the latest news of different projects related to the BioRefine cluster. And we also have a LinkedIn page. We also have a Twitter page for more daily news. Before going into the program itself, I would like to return to the previous slide. So if yes. So today we will be looking at both projects, one dealing with the production of algae from biogas digestate, ALG-AD, hence the acronym, and the other one on recycling-derived fertilizers or nutrients recovered from, well, there is someone talking, so I think best also to turn off mics and cameras while other people are introducing or speaking, just for practical reasons. And ReNu2Farm then is looking at recovering nutrients from secondary resources and using them as new fertilizing products. So that also means that we have for our topic today as a central theme, the circular bioeconomy and producing algal biomass on one end and recycling-derived fertilizers. Now, of course, a lot of people are behind the screens working on these projects, but I would also like to take the opportunity to invite two people to the front, meaning the coordinators of both projects, and that's Katja Weiler and Karel Llewellyn. I hope my Welsh is pronouncing it correctly, but if Karel and Katja could come to the front and just briefly also introduce themselves, not diving into the topic because that's where the entire day is for, but at least then the people can put the faces to the names.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Erik. I hope my voice is broadcasted well. My name is Katja Weiler. I'm taking the role of the lead partner and the lead position of the Interreg 5B Northwest Europe project ReNu2Farm. And this project is running since nowadays 4 years. And also we have 3 more years to go. And we are very glad to present today our results.
And hello, everyone. I hope that you can all hear me loudly and clearly. Thank you very much, Erik, for the introduction. Yes, I'm Karel Llewellyn from Swansea University. And indeed, it's a great privilege and an honor to be here today to hear about all of the results and conclusions from the ALG-AD project. So the ALG-AD project funded by Northwest Interreg, the European Interreg, is about bringing together the ALG-AD, the anaerobic digestion industry, and using the digestae as a source of nutrients to cultivate algae and then produce products from the algae. So very much a circular economy project. So I'm very pleased to welcome you all here today and so that you can hear about the project. Thank you. Thank you, Erik.
Thank you, and thank you for introducing also yourselves. And I think indeed during the rest of the sessions, mostly the parallel sessions, as well as the breakout rooms afterwards, you will have good opportunities to interact, of course, as well, and during the panel discussions as well. So what do we have on the menu for today? So today, as we are now speaking, we are in the first part, so the opening part, in which I will also introduce the plenary keynote speakers. So we have 4 excellent speakers lined up for you in the plenary session. So that's Matthew Thompson from Interreg Northwest Europe itself, Wim de Beuckelaere from DG Environment from the European Commission, Harmen Dekker, the president or chairperson, the director of European Biogas Association, and then Vitor Verdelho from the European Algae Biomass Association. After the keynote speakers, we will have time for questions and answers, which also means that during the talks, you are kindly invited to post questions in the chat part, which we can then also take up during the Q&A. After that, we will be diving into a coffee break, but before we do, I will nudge you towards your respective breakout sessions, so the 2 parallel sessions, at which time then we will have the first a movie starting for each of the projects, and then you will have a short coffee break before diving into the topic at hand. There are 2 sessions, ALG-AD and the ReNu2Farm. So the ALG-AD will start with Carol, and ReNu2Farm will start with Katja. You have briefly seen them now in the joint session here, but they will then lead and introduce the project themselves. And then we have 3 speakers following that. I will not introduce all of them. That is for those sessions to introduce. After that, we will go into another coffee break, and after that, we will have a vivid and I hope a very dynamic discussion with the panel, consisting out of 3 experts from both projects, so 6 people in total, and which also will be moderated by me. So at that session, or at that part, we will be reviewing the main highlights coming from the parallel sessions. And we will have a brief discussion on overcoming challenges and then the way ahead, including some opportunities and hurdles that we might face towards the future. Then also important is that we will have the platform open for breakout sessions. We will introduce that in due time, but there are 5 sessions per project. In which, in smaller groups, you can engage in networking in more elaborate detail yourself as well. So I think that's, in a nutshell, the menu that we have for today. So that's, I think you can agree that we have a quite exciting journey ahead for now. And then I would like to invite the first plenary speaker. So that was Matthew Thompson from Interreg Northwest Europe. And he has been a project officer at this joint secretariat for now 6 years, covering innovation and resource efficiency. And before joining the Interreg Northwest Europe program, he has been working also on an Interreg to Seas program and was academically working in urban planning, regional economic development policy, and sustainability. So I would gladly hand over the floor to Matthew now.
Matthew Thompson. I'm the project officer for ALG-AD ReNu2Farm, and I just want to give a brief presentation on the Interreg Northwest Europe program, how the 2 projects fit into that program, and the future for Interreg Northwest Europe. As stated, I work at the Joint Secretariat. I follow both projects. So first, I want to quickly discuss about the current program. The ambition for Interreg Northwest Europe, as defined by the member states, was to be a key economic player in the world and create an attractive place to work and live with high levels of innovation, sustainability, and cohesion. The current program runs from 2014 to 2020, with all projects finishing by the end of 2023, barring any more global pandemics. The program area covers Northwest Europe, which includes France, Switzerland, Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands, UK, and Ireland. And we currently have 102 finance projects with over 1,000 partners. We have a split of roughly 50-50 between public and private. And these include educational, research, local, regional, and national governments, as well as SMEs, large companies, and other stakeholders. We have allocated 376 million euros in ERDF, but as we only cover 60% of the project costs, this actually amounts to over 620 million euros being spent on projects in the Northwest Europe area. As you can see by the second map, most areas of Northwest Europe have at least one organization participating, but the program areas also allows participation from outside the program area, which is why you see Spain, Italy, Austria, and Denmark on the map. The current program has 3 priorities. We have innovation, low carbon, and resource efficiency. It is under this 3rd priority, resource efficiency, which aims to optimize the reuse of material, natural resources in Northwest Europe, that ALGE-AD and ReNu2Farm fall under. Within priority 3, we currently have 23 projects being financed. The types of projects are quite diverse. So we have projects covering the recovery of resources from waste, resource extraction from biomass and wastewater, landfill mining, recycling, the repair of digital infrastructure, and green construction, to name a few. This represents 88 million euros in RDF, but as we only fund 60%, that's actually over 140 million euros being spent. We have over 260 project partners participating. Some of these partners will be participating in more than one project. All projects are required to have a transnational partnership and a transnational collaboration. This is a partnership made up of partners from multiple countries working together to both develop the project and to implement it, and who gain from that collaboration. We've also had 2 calls for capitalization of projects from the current programming period, so 2014 to 2020. And these projects could apply for additional funding and time to take some of the successful results and to build upon them. ReNu2Farm was actually one of the projects that was successful at the latest cap call. So that's the current program. And as we say, the program runs to the end of 2023, but we've allocated all our funding. And so now we're working on a new program to cover 2021 to 2027. The overall objective of this new program will be focusing on promoting a green, smart, and just transition for all of Northwest Europe territories, with the aim to support a balanced development and to make all regions more resilient. So what is known about the current program? We've got the program area. So as you can see, there's now additional areas from Germany and the Netherlands participating, which are highlighted in pink. We're also happy to have Switzerland back again as a 3rd country in the program, but the UK won't be participating in this next programming period. You can find this information on our program website. At the moment, the program is still being developed. Starting in June 2020, the Northwest Europe Task Force, which we abbreviate to NTF, pulled together all the program bodies to help design the future program. There's been a number of meetings held, and they're still ongoing. We had a stakeholder consultation, which was launched in February this year. We had a strong interest. We have over 400 answers, and these are currently being taken on by the NTF. The timeline is that we have a draft Interreg program to the European Commission before the end of summer, so that might still be possible. and have an answer by the end of the year or the beginning of next year. We hope to launch our first call for projects in the spring of 2022. Obviously, though, we are still waiting for approval from the Commission. In terms of the sorts of topics that we want, we have a number of priorities. The current program has 3 priorities, but for the new program, we have 5. There is a greater overall focus on promoting a green and smart transition. So we have the first 3 priorities here, with priority 1, which will focus on smart climate resilience for North West York territories. And under that, there are 2 specific objectives. For priority 2, we're looking at a smart and just energy transition. And for priority 3, we are looking at the transition towards a place-based circular economy. It's probably this 3rd priority which will be of most interest to the participants here today. So under this 3rd priority, we have a specific objective of promoting the transition to a circular and resource-efficient economy. We kind of imagine that the sorts of activities we will have under this priority would be the elaboration and implementation of joint strategies or action plans, either actions for testing tools and new solutions that can be upscaled, demonstration and testing of solution services and technologies in the real world, but also capacity building and awareness raising among activities in the area of the circular economy. Given the nature of the circular economy and the challenges it faces, we imagine that sorts of organizations that will be participating will be from individuals, companies, SMEs, local, regional, national governments, so it's quite diverse. Final 2 priorities we have are priority 4, which is fostering innovation capacity in the North West Europe regions, and priority 5, which will be transition to a socially inclusive, sustainable and resilient society. I should point out that these are still under development and they're drafts, but at this time I would not expect any major changes to happen. The final budget has yet to be determined. What I would recommend is that you check our website and also LinkedIn, Twitter, and we even have a YouTube channel so that you can help to find more information about the future of the program. Thank you for your time.
And thank you, Matthew. So as indicated, we will reserve the questions. I have seen questions coming in via the chat part, but we will reserve them for after the 4th plenary speaker. So that leaves me to introduce the 2nd speaker. I think many of you are already familiar with Wim de Beuckelaere. He is from DG Environment from the European Commission, where he has been working since 2002. Before that, he had a career in consumer organizations, but as of 2002, he joined the European Commission, and first that was at DG Sanco in Food and Veterinary Office of DG Sanco. And then in 2004, going to join the policy unit responsible for chemicals, contaminants, and pesticides. And then now more recent, since 2017, he is Policy Officer for the implementation of the Nitrates Directive at the Commission Director General, responsible for the EU policy on the environment. And it's also in that capacity that we know him mostly in the last few years, as he is also involved in evaluation of nitrate action programs prepared by member states, and then these go into bilateral talks with European Commission, and then these are granted, including derogations related to the Nitrates Directive. So in that sense, the GNV is an important not only player, but defining actor on driving things like recycling-derived fertilizers forwards towards the future. But also on other topics related to circularity, there are, of course, many points that are of interest. So without further ado, I would like to hand over then the floor to Wim de Beuckelaere.
Good morning. My name is Wim de Beuckelaere. I'm working at European Commission in the Director General for Environment, where I am responsible for the implementation of the Nitrates Directive. This morning, I'm going to explain you where we are with the ReNu criteria. But let me first draw your attention to the targets that are set in the Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategy as regards nutrients. In particular, the nutrient losses should by 2030 be reduced with 50%, while ensuring that there's no deterioration in soil fertility. And this should result in the reduction of the use of fertilizer by at least 20%. This will be done, among others, by implementing and enforcing fully the environmental and climate legislation, by applying balanced fertilization and sustainable nutrient management, by managing better nitrogen and phosphorus throughout their life cycle, and by recycling of organic waste into renewable fertilizers. And indeed, also the use of ReNu, the production and the use of ReNu can contribute to reaching the targets of the Green Deal. As you know, the Safe Manure report was published in September 2020, and it contains technical proposals for the safe use of processed manure above the threshold established by the Nitrate Directive for nitrate vulnerable zones. The report is available online via this link. It contains a definition of ReNu, which is recovered nitrogen from manure, which is obtained partially or fully from livestock through processing, and that can be used and in the same way as mineral fertilizer, while ensuring that the objectives of the nitrate directives are met, and also providing the necessary agronomic benefits for that ensures plant growth. The report proposed criteria for the safe use of that ReNu. It concerns the composition, the production, and also the use of ReNu. So it should be obtained through a physical, chemical, or biological process step that leads to concentration of mineral nitrogen. It contains ratios for total carbon and total N, and also minimum ratios for the mineral N and total nitrogen. It contains as well maximum levels for heavy metals. It requires to ensure that application rates of ReNu are synchronized with the plant requirements for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in order to minimize nutrient leachings and runoff losses. It also contains requirements to reduce ammonia emissions and to also during application and also during storage. Now, why should we progress with this ReNu criteria? Well, indeed, because the use of ReNu can increase nitrogen use efficiency. It is a more sustainable solution compared to biological treatment or compared to burning or export of manure. It replaces mineral fertilizer and therefore can reduce CO2 emissions. It is a step towards recovery of phosphates and, as a consequence, reducing dependency of imported phosphate rocks. It allows increased valorization of organic carbon present in manure. It stimulates the market for recovered nutrients, and it will also contribute to the harmonization of use of ammonium scrubbing salts, for which we have noticed that not all member states consider them or give them the same status. Some member states even consider ammonium scrubbing salts that are actively removed during manure processing as a mineral fertilizer. There are also some arguments against the use of ReNu, and it is that allowing ReNu in nitrogen vulnerable zones under identical provisions applied to nitrogen-containing chemical fertilizer would not tackle the problem of manure excess and the consequences for the environment at root. It could be used as an incentive to further intensify animal production. The problem of ammonia emissions and depositions can increase, and also stimulating renewal may have a negative effect on development of other organic fertilizers. So how should we now progress with this renewal? Well, there is a country-specific solution that we could take, and that would then be at the request of a member states. The Commission would adopt an implementing decision allowing that member state to use processed manure complying with the criteria above the 170 kilogram nitrogen per year and hectare. We could also go for a solution that can apply to all member states, and in that case, the Commission adapts, in accordance with the regulatory procedure with scrutiny, the Annex 3 to the Nitrates Directive to the scientific and technological progress, and excludes renewal from the 170 kilogram ceiling. The advantages of the country-specific solution would be, or that this mechanism is already foreseen and used in the directive. It is the so-called derogations, where we authorize member states under certain conditions to apply more than 170 kilogram per hectare per year in nitrate vulnerable zones. We can include in such derogation decisions binding conditions of the use linked to the safe application of renewal. We can also introduce requirements for monitoring and control. Conditions in the derogation can be adapted to the situation in the member states that has requested for an authorization, and these conditions can be reviewed based on experience gained. There are, however, also disadvantages, because these decisions would need to be made for each member state individually. That is quite a heavy administrative procedure. It also would mean for member states, or for some of the interested member states, a double derogation, as they already benefit from a derogation on the application of the raw manure in nitrate vulnerable zones. Decisions are also limited in time and subject to a vote in the committee, and that would have to be renewed periodically. The time and this time and also geographical limitations could create uncertainty for possible investors in manure technology. About the solution for all member states, which would be introduced via an amendment to Annex 3 of the directive. The advantage is that it allows the use of the renewer and adopts legally binding criteria and conditions, and that would apply in all member states. So the adoption of multiple derogation can be avoided, and changes would not be limited in time, and there would be legal certainty needed for possible investments in manure processing. There's, however, also some disadvantages here, and that there is mainly that there is a risk that the European Parliament or the Council might oppose to this amendment during the regulatory procedure with scrutiny. Also, not all member states may be in favor of the use of renewal in their country. And if at a later stage it would appear that conditions of use need to be introduced and updated, this can be done only through the same procedure. What are the next steps? Well, we are collecting, and to a large extent have already collected, the views of the member states, and most of the member states who have given their views already expressed that they would prefer to go for a country-specific solution. We have, however, not yet finalized the internal discussion. When we progress with that, there would be a need to reflect about the conditions for the authorization. Of course, there would be the criteria proposed for the protection, for the production, the composition, and the application of the renewer would need to be included and need to be introduced. We would also need conditions as regards the monitoring of the production, the use, and also the effect on the water quality. we need to think about how to organize and what needs to be controlled and expected. And finally, we do also need, in the condition for authorization, a requirement for reporting. So what also would need to be done is that we need to reflect on a contents of an authorization dossier, and if a member state wants to apply or request this authorization, what information would be required in such an authorization dossier. So that's where we are, and I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you as well for your kind presentation. I think it's very, very clear, and many of us are very hopeful on seeing this move forward, whichever route that Europe chooses to take. If in the end we could make best use of those renewable-based products, that would be beneficial for the circular economy. I think many of us here would agree. So again, do ask your questions via the chat, and we will come back to them during the panel or plenary discussion with the 4 speakers afterwards. But I would like to introduce the next speaker here on screen, Harmen Dekker. And I would also like, Harmen Dekker has worked for almost 15 years within the sustainability sector and is devoted to the mitigation of climate change. I think something we can all stand behind. He has both technical and business administration background, and he has first built his career in the water and gas sector, and more recently, he has been directing the European Biogas associations over the last 5 years. And during these years, he has not only focused on the expansion of biogas and biomethane in particular, but also on the implementation of techniques such as bio-LNG, biomethanol, biohydrogen, and bioplastics. And within the focus of EBA, he has been, of course, advocating the biogas as a key enabling technology, also towards nutrients. And of course, biogas is very central as a topic today, as we have ALG-AD, in which time we make the link to algae, but also biogas plays a pivotal role in nutrient recycling. So I would like now to hand over the floor to Harmen Dekker.
Good day to you all. I'm really honored to be invited to this showcase event of ALG-AD and ReNu2Farm. And I'm really looking forward actually to some insightful presentations later on. Today, I would like to share with you a European perspective or outlook on the nutrient remediation. I'm Harmen Dekker. I'm director of the European Biogas Association, representing the anaerobic digestion industry, but actually the full value chain from both the feedstock till the users of energy and the users of digestate. But before I go into detail on that, I would just like to share a few thoughts with you. We are now in an era where we're thinking about possibilities on new innovations, and that is good. But we need to think about our consequences of the actions we take. And that is a lesson we have learned the hard way, and is a lesson we need to implement on anything what we do, on any innovation we are putting in place. Pardon me. Why I'm saying this? Many years back, humankind has discovered that you could combine nitrogen from air with phosphorus, mineral phosphorus, and make some chemical fertilizers, and that way, or mineral fertilizers if you like. This was a very good solution. Everybody was happy and the world would turn green and we could supply enough food. But it was a big downside effect. And the downside effect was not only among the CO2 emissions, what it cost, but it was also on the soil end. The soil is dramatically degrading in Europe. The top organic carbon content of the soil is varying greatly and is depleting as well. Also, we have excess nitrogen in places. We are not looking after our nutrients. We are not looking after our soil. It was so easy to see we have a green field. But somebody said, and a professor of Wageningen actually said, if you fly over Europe, it is all green. But if you look into the soil, it's a desert. So we need to make sure that we capture the nutrients we create, our organic nutrients, to make sure that we can grow the carbon content in the soil. We make the soil fertile again and make good use of all the nutrients which are there. And that's not only in the soil, it's also in the waters. We have our images on our mind on the sea snot in Turkey, for example. And actually, although the news is now moved on to other subjects, it is not away by far. Actually, the problem has grown even bigger than it was. And it is all to do with the eutrophication of the waters. We need to control our nutrients, and we need to make sure that any innovation we put in place, we know what the consequences are, and we also take care of that. So just a bit before I go further, a little bit about the Biogas Association. We are an association representing 7,000 stakeholders along this biogas supply chain, from feedstock to users of digestate and users of energy. And with that, we are well over a decade within Brussels. We are one of the larger associations within Europe. Biogas within that has a very central role to play. And why is that? Because we're looking after four parts which are very important. The economic growth, which is also in the agriculture, but also the social well-being with a better environment. And also on air climate, when, for example, the energy content of biogas is being used as fuel, because it makes that the air pollution is coming down, for example. But what today we are going to focus on is actually on the environment. And one of the parts is the nutrient part. And the focus will be on the digestate as a valuable nutrient. And for those who are maybe not so familiar with anaerobic digestion, it actually takes on organic wastes and puts this in an air-free environment. There it is digested and biogas is being produced as one main product, but we have even a second product, which often is being said it is a waste product, but it's actually not. It is a full-blown, very important product, and that is the digestate. The digestate is actually a perfect example of an organic fertilizer, or can be used in nutrients for other parts of algae production as well. Digestate is very important. Looking at the fertilizing content and displacing the chemical fertilizers we have used so many years, actually it saves, with 1 ton of chemical fertilizers being displaced, it saves 1 ton of oil, 108 tons of water, and 7 tons of CO2 emissions. That is the reason we need to make sure that we are circular. That is the reason we are trying to see if we can capture all nutrients and put it in those places where it's needed. Then, of course, the question arises, is there enough digestate available in the future? And the simple answer to that is yes. Worldwide, we have well over 150 billion tons of organic waste which can be used for anaerobic digestion and or composting. And only 2% of that is being used, which means that there is enough nutrients available for both restoring the soil, restoration of the soil, if you like, and also for nutrient recycling and use in algae production, for example. The types of organic streams we're looking at are agricultural waste, like manure, crop residues. but also sequential crops, wastewater sludge, industrial organic waste and municipal organic waste. And those last parts are a little bit more difficult because those can contain contaminants. That is something we need to look at. We need to be sure that if we put nutrients to the soil, we do not create a problem again. So those nutrients needs to be looked at and needs to be put in place in a proper way. So we just looked at worldwide and how much organic organic feedstock is available. Now, if you look to the biomethane potential within Europe alone, so biomethane is of course looking on the energy side. Related to that is the digestate, and we produce right now 193 terawatt hours of energy, but we can go up to close to 1400 terawatt hours in 2040-2050. Actually, this would mean around about 30 to 40% of the gas need in Europe in future. But that means also that we have plenty of nutrients available which we can recycle and use for restoration of our soil. Europe has already recognized to some extent that there is some gains to make. So under the Green Deal, initiatives have come into place, like the bioeconomy strategy, sustainable agriculture strategy, Algae initiative. Also, the farm to fork and biodiversity strategy are saying that they would like to reduce the nutrient loss by 50%. That is a very good part, because this would mean that we could reduce the amount of fertilizers to be used, organic or mineral. So looking at this, there are a lot of initiatives there. What would be very helpful is that we make sure that those are harmonized. Not only looking at the bioeconomy side, but especially, for example, for biogas, it's important not only looking at, say, the nutrient from digestate, but also to look at the match between how those policies are being developed on the nutrient side together with the energy side. At this moment, we see that within Europe, the farm to fork strategy, but also the methane strategy, is really putting biogas on the map, a place which it deserves. But if it's not matched by also using this other part we have at the energy side, and it's not the energy side, the gaseous fuel is not also being promoted, then of course we will not be able to grow also on the nutrient side. And not many of you probably know that biogas in itself, and again, the energy product, has even negative carbon greenhouse gas emissions. So the importance of biogas for both nutrient and energy side is very important. And I would like to return also to the wastewater part. I started off saying that we need to think about our consequences. And I told earlier in the presentation that we need to be sure that those difficult nutrients which are there, for example, from wastewater sludges, needs to be traced and monitored to make sure that no contamination is going into the soil. So therefore, the waste status needs to be retained for that, as long as there are no other techniques to make those clean. If they are, of course, the waste status can be lifted. So all in all, what we have here is a great way to use nutrients for soil and energy for our own use. The nutrients can also be used for the algae production. I'm very curious on how the next presentations will pan out and what headways have been made over the past few years. Thank you for listening. And if possible at all, I hope to speak to you all later. Thank you.
And I'm sure you will have that opportunity in the coming sessions. But before we can go to that, I would like to also invite our fourth speaker. So I would also ask Vitor to turn on his camera. Vitor Verdelho Vieira is a mentor of several companies that he also co-founded. I must say, when I was going through the bio, I was quite impressed. He is working at the interface of or has been working at the interface of consultancy, academia, and actually business creation and mentoring business. So a little bit of a serial entrepreneur, you might say. And been doing that for over 3 decades, because the first company that he's founded was a microalgae biotech company, Necton, in 1989 already. And then he also, like I mentioned, he has been working at the interface, because in 2000 until 2015, he was also involved in management, the entrepreneurship program and business incubator from the Catholic University in Porto. But today he is here in the capacity of general manager of the European Algae Biomass Association. So his business experience being as wide, and his engineering consultancy experience also, that makes him an ideal person to, of course, lead that charge for the Algae Biomass Association. Vitor, I would like to hand over the floor to you and yeah, give your presentation.
Thank you, Erik, and thank you for to the organization for inviting me. It's a pleasure to present on behalf of EABA. So let me share my screen. So my topic is why algae biomass is important. This is a very general topic, but I think you will like to see this approach. So why algae? First of all, we need to say what are algae, and I'll go into that. And then what is the environmental relevance, economic relevance, and social relevance of algae. Finally, I will explain this in the framework of the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. So first of all, well, let's go to see what are algae. The framework that we have about what are algae, there are many definitions about algae. And about 5 years ago, we in the ABA developed a position paper with a possible explanation about what are algae. This is online in the website, What Are Algae? You can download it. This took 4 years to reach, and it was coordinated by Professor Allinson Smith in Cambridge. Then the conclusion was that obviously algae is a common name. It's not a taxonomic group, but includes a wide range of taxonomically unrelated groups of organisms that share common traits, like chlorophyll, like lack of differentiated tissues, and all of them are aquatic. But there are some exceptions. This is extremely interesting because as this is a very diversified group, we will see here cyanobacteria, dinoflagellates, diatoms, chlorophytes. So we see under the umbrella of algae a wide range of organisms. But let's see this in more detail and what is the environmental relevance. So first of all, as most of people know, algae provide a large part of the oxygen that we breathe. Of course, algae also consume oxygen, but the net balance is positive. And we see that all the water bodies in the planet, in their surface, we find algae. Also, algae, not only oxygen, algae are food. Algae are in the beginning of the food chain in the oceans, and they provide a very relevant source of food for the zooplankton that feeds on algae and then is eaten by small fish and small fish are eaten by larger fish. And this, in this framework, just as a curiosity, we can see that we need 1 kilogram of algae to get, we need 1 ton of algae to get 1 kilogram of shark meat. So all along the food chain, algae are very relevant in providing food. The same happens in the energy content, where we need 20,000 calories to get 20 calories in the end of the food chain. Then it is important to refer that in this algae world, there are 2 types or 2 sizes: unicellular algae, microalgae, and large multicellular plants, the seaweed. And they have typically different composition. And this is just an example of Undaria, the macroalgae, and Arthrospira, known as spirulina. As a conclusion relating to environmental relevance, we can see that algae provide oxygen. Algae also transform inorganic materials into organic materials, and they are a possible substitute for energy. So in a map of the blue bioeconomy, we can see that algae relevance starts in the early stage in the aquatic environments, but then it goes from oceans to freshwater environments. But then we will see next that in the application level, algae are also very relevant for fertilizers, for forests, for horticulture, and they are involved in also food applications for humans. So they are almost in all kinds of frameworks. So going now to the economic relevance of the algae, we can see that from these, we see some images of algae here in the left. This is a picture from Professor Qian Hu from Wuhan University. So this diversity of organisms turns into many molecules that turn into many possible applications. We can see that both microalgae and seaweed are in these 8 levels of applications that go from food, feed, health, cosmetics, fuels, fertilizers, wastewater treatment, and chemicals. The value of the algae along this economic relevance depends on formulations. So we have, in the end, both microalgae and seaweed in different formulations, and all along the value chain from the producers to the end products, value is increasingly as for many other products. As a conclusion here, we can see that algae extracts and algae molecules are used everywhere in many products that go from nutraceuticals, pills, to many products in candy industry relating to seaweed, to feed, so a wide range. And we see that the economic relevance is very large in the size of the $1 billion in the production level and many $1 billion in the consumer level. So going on to the social relevance, we can see that algae also have a very relevant, are very relevant at the social level. And here we will see it in the world level, and later, next slide, we will see at the European level. So we can see that nearly 1 million persons work with algae. These numbers are from FAO. And in the European level, it's of course a much smaller relevance, but we can see that research, the number of people working in research is very relevant compared with worldwide. So just to show that algae are, we will start with seaweed. We see people here working with seaweed cultivation in Asia. And we can see that people are very present. The social relevance of algae in seaweed is very relevant, very important. Here we can see harvesting and the cultivation of seaweed in Europe. Again, a very relevant impact of people in the process. So very important socially. Relating to the microalgae, we can see here many open systems for microalgae cultivation worldwide, from Europe, United States, Asia, Australia. So, and here we see that the systems are smaller, more automatized, and of course using less people. In Europe, in going to the photobioreactors in Europe and elsewhere in the world, you can see many photobioreactors. There are many technologies which are operated in a more automatic level, less relevance at social level, but a higher economical relevance. Finally, going to the role of algae about sustainability. We can see, I will show you that algae are relevant in all Millennium Goals, United Nations Millennium Goals. And this is very relevant because it is here where we can find the opportunities. If we jump deeply into each goal, we find opportunities in using algae to fulfill the Millennium Goals. I will not go in detail into each of the goals, but you can probably read this later. But we can see that algae are relevant in fighting the poverty, mainly generating employment, both in seaweed level and microalgae. Traditionally, algae have been cultivated, like spirulina, have been cultivated in Africa, and seaweeds in Asia, and they are very relevant in hunger objective. Health nutraceuticals are one of the main utilizations of both microalgae and seaweed. In education, seaweed farming directly provides economic conditions to increase the education level of the populations. And of course, algae knowledge and understanding provides to all young people a better understanding of how our planet works out. Gender issues, as you saw from the pictures, women and men work in the algae. This is not a men only. And relating to microalgae, for example, I can tell you that most of the research is done by women. Clear water objective, we see the use of algae for photobioremediation and wastewater treatment. And the algae are increasingly used for applications related with biofuels. Most of them still in a development level, but very promising. Economic conditions are very relevant. It's a target, the 18th target, algae, especially relating to seaweed, are very relevant to achieve this target. Industry and innovation, this is one of the points where we have also many opportunities for new projects. In Europe, there are about 100 projects at the moment relating to algae, both national and European financed. And these projects are very focused in innovation. Algae also algae ventures exist all over the world in all continents. So they help to reduce the economical, social inequalities all across the planet. And the many applications like wastewater treatment and the direct use of algae in the intelligent buildings are, for example, a very interesting way to have more sustainable cities. Responsible consumption objective is achieved through increasingly use of algae, both microalgae and seaweed in aquaponic solutions. This is just an example, but it is very relevant. Economic climate action, algae as CCU is increasingly being used, and also search for the carbon credit schemes. Life below water. Algae are very, as I already mentioned, also algae are very relevant for the feed of organisms in the food chain. And so they are directly food for the fish that exist under the water. At the same time, algae are used for food and for feed. So algae life on land is conditioned by algae that can be used as feed. And at the same time, as fertilizers extensively. Algae is already an established solution for biofertilizers. The two final Millennium Goals, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals have a more indirect involvement of algae, but we can see that in the algae sector there are several organizations worldwide, including the European Algae Biomass Association, that interact and influence governments all over. And this way they contribute for having the stronger institutions and higher levels of justice. Partnership for the goals, most large companies, like for example Cargill and several other multinational companies, are every day monitoring how they achieve the Millennium Goals. So both microalgae and seaweed companies are involved in partnerships to follow the achievement of the Millennium Goals. This final picture sums up everything that I said about these Millennium Goals. We can see that the algae sector, the algae biomass sector, is involved in all the three drivers, three pillars, and in the governance that is related with that. For example, algae, the European Algae Biomass Association promoted the standardization process that you can see here as one of the final goals. Erik, I see that you are moving. I'm approaching to the end. So just final conclusion, algae are a sustainable crop. Algae biomass is a crop for the future. And finally, thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, and also thank you for, of course, for sticking to time. So much appreciated. Now, I would like to invite the four keynote speakers of this morning. So that is Matthew, of course, when the Beuckelaere, Harmen, Dekker, and yourself, or Vitor, is already has his camera on. So, but if the other, yes, I see everyone's face appearing. That is very good. We have already some questions in chat. I also received some via other social media, but the chat is the way to move forward. Of course, I can also ask those questions. But for those in the audience that still have lingering questions, do not feel shy. Just put them in the chat and we will try to cover those as well. But then let me scan through the questions that I see. The first one for Matthew. Are there regional contact persons that will help to get project ID on the way?
Yep, that's a very simple one, yes. Obviously, we're in the stage of developing a new program, so the roles that the contact points will take will vary. But yes, there will be regional contact points in each country. You can even see them now. If you just go onto our website, we do have the contact points. We'll also have hopefully some additional tools to help partners develop the project ideas. These are still being developed, so I just recommend keep checking things like LinkedIn, the Twitter account, to find out when these things will be made available.
Yes, and I think it's a good tip to go to the NWE Interreg website for the contact points per country, and in some cases per region. Follow-up question on that was on the new program in development. Are there timelines indicated on the first call, opening and closing, or is that still under development?
We're aiming for spring 2022. Obviously, it's dependent on approval from the European Commission, so that could potentially change, but that's the target. Obviously, spring could be right up until maybe the beginning of summer. Again, just have to keep checking the program website, but next year
we'll do that. But that at least gives a ballpark range of time period. Also, a question on timeline is for Wim de Beuckelaere. It's a question that was anticipated. It was coming from Romke Postma. What is a timeline for finalization of renewal?
Well, let's say that if we go one of the two ways, what is in fact needed is for the users or the potential users certainly a legal certainty. That means, in fact, if we progress with that, or if you want to use it, you want to be sure that it is allowed to be used above this 170. So therefore, a decision or a regulation is needed. So the decision would be a country-specific, a regulation would be an annex to the change to the Annex 3, meaning that we then authorize it to all countries. So in the case of a decision, what we would, in fact, following the procedure which we apply for derogation, that is following a request of a member state who have to introduce a dossier. So I don't think that any member state has a dossier ready now. And then imagine that we receive such a dossier with the necessary information that needs to, let's say, convince us and the other member states that this can be used in a safe way, or will be used in a safe way with all necessary guarantees. It might take a little bit of time in order to see, okay, exactly what are we going to put in that decision. So when you talk about the timeline following an application and taking into account the timing that we need for decisions that would at least take, let's say, taken into account internal discussions, administrative pathways to follow, etc. It cannot be this year for sure. Something could happen during the next year, and that will depend on the dossier, the completeness of the dossier, and in fact the convincingness of the dossier. As regards decision, as regards the regulation, by the way, a regulation that would then be at the initiative of the Commission, and for the moment the Commission is not taking such an initiative, so we are not taking that initiative. So yeah, so as regards regulation, and if we would take that initiative, it would even take more time, because then, as I explained already, there is scrutiny. We call it the procedure with scrutiny. And by the way, sorry for this terminology, but it means in fact that we also need feedback and consultation feedback from the Parliament and from the Council, which again takes more time.
So if I read between the lines, then derogation is the fastest path, also from your presentation, but has the risk for certain uncertainties towards investments. So there we need to address, to mitigate uncertainties. But
well, that has been already raised by some member states, and of course, as you know, derogation, the current derogation, they are linked to the action programs, and action programs need to be revised every 4 years. So this is something else. So we can think about, do we need to follow that timeline, or can we extend? And that is in fact, if the Commission progresses with that, that will be okay. What are the arguments? What are the economics behind it, and things like that? So that can be considered, of course.
Oh, that's very interesting and hopeful developments. There is a follow-up question on Renew from Roland de Bruyne, who indicates, well, it sounds contradictory, reducing use of fertilizers, reducing leaching of nitrates, but increasing recovered nitrogen above 170 kilograms per hectare.
Well, there are, I think, in the Netherlands, among others, some projects, pilot projects, where they're using already Renew or using recovered mineral fertilizer. And the idea here is to use it as an alternative to chemical fertilizer. Of course, what will happen, and probably most of you know that, there is a fertilization standard which sets an amount of fertilizer that can be used, and that is partly covered by manure because of the maximum, and the rest is then covered by mineral fertilizer. So what would happen is that the standard, of course, would not change. We never, in the balanced fertilization required to fertilize as much as the crop needs. So you cannot go above that, but what you do, you replace mineral fertilizer with this recovered nitrogen from manure.
Adding to that, not only in the Netherlands, but closer to home also in Flanders, but also throughout Europe. I also know of large-scale experiments and implementations in Italy, in Spain, and so on, doing exactly that. And indeed, not raising the bar or lowering the bar and adding more per hectare, but substituting the synthetic fertilizer top-up, which is needed for crop requirement. So not opening the door or floodways for spreading unlimited amounts, but to replace what is already being given. Moving on, there is also a question for Harmen Dekker, also related to nutrients. What nutrient strategies does EBA already practice? And I'm very curious which quality of fertilizers could be made and whether we can cooperate with biorefinery of plant juice to upgrade these fertilizers. So that's more detailed questions, but I think the first part was more general. What nutrient strategies does EBA already practice? And that was coming from Elma, that question. So that's for you, Harmen.
Well, thank you, Erik, and thanks, Elma, for the question. What we do, first of all, we see an increased interest, as when the Beuckelaere also already said, is in the organic fertilizers. We see that there is an increased interest, and within the EBA, actually, the chemical or the mineral fertilizer companies are member, and we are trying to push together to see if the organic fertilizers can replace to some extent the mineral fertilizers and have a preferred status as well. So that's a good start to go from. Beside that, we are within the EBA increasingly busy actually with this subject. So we are participating in projects, European projects like systemic and Nutri2Cycle, to ensure that we create a fertilizer which is good and can be used, refertilizing, I would say, the soil and making an impact there. And if you would like to have more technical information and in-depth information, I think Erik can tell a little bit more about that as well. On top of that, we have an industrial chair with the University of Ghent looking especially at these type of subjects. So what are we then thinking of? We are thinking of on how to use the liquid state, the digest state, but also the dry matter. We're looking also in combinations of composting, what we can do, and other types to actually take out nitrogen or phosphates or other minerals from the digest state in order that you can use it as you see fit, but do say kind of precision nutrification of the soil.
Yeah, and yeah, kind of you to pitch, but if I get started, then I'm afraid I will consume all time. But indeed, a lot of things are moving, positioning biogas as a key enabling technology to recycle nutrients at a higher nutrient use efficiency than the feedstock products going into it, including, for example, raw manure. But as I said, I will not consume time going into detail myself. I would like to ask a question for Vitor. That was also in the chat. Thank you, Vitor, for your rich overview. I'm interested whether we could cooperate with salt algae in our biorefinery with grass juice. So that's, let's say, an open invitation that you might want to look in. That's Elma Schoenmaker. Do you know of combinations of companies in the EU working on plant-based juices and algae growth? Before handing you the floor, Elma, I would also point you in the direction of Marcela de Souza, who I know is also working from that in actually also in Northwest European context. So, and Marcela de Souza is one of the contributors to the ALG-AD project. So that's one tip. But then, of course, I would gladly also hand this pitch to Vitor himself.
Thank you, Erik. I will be very fast. The answer is yes. I know companies that are using algae for juices, but I'm not going to list them now because anyway, Elma already emailed me a few seconds ago with her coordinates asking for that. And I welcome everybody that wants to additional information to email me. And just to say that it is one possible application, the very relevant for plant-based food. At the moment, the hot topic is the use for algae for plant-based proteins, replacement of plant-based proteins. The reason is because with the microalgae in particular, in fermentation, you can control exactly the composition and you have a very reliable source of protein.
Yep, that's indeed, and there have also been actually from DG Agri operational groups who have been investigating such developments. So it is indeed an interesting development. Maybe Marcella could also add her email address, or I can also do that in a minute. I saw indeed in the chat that Vitor has added his email address, so that exchange is already running, so that's good. I think we are at 15 minutes, which was my limit for posing questions. I do see that some answers have been answered and some additional information has been added. For example, Matthew has added the website to Interreg Northwest Europe. That is very interesting to keep track on the calls and on the national contact points. And also other people have been putting in some information with links and publications. But I'm afraid that given the 15 minutes that we had for Q&A, we will have to wrap up here. And I would like to thank all the presenters for their very nice presentations, I think, and the audience for the dynamic questions, and of course then for the informative responses that we got as a consequence from our speakers.